This episode is sponsored by the
And
portfoliopath.com.
of course, financial independence kind of came into that conversation because the way we view money is that it's a tool to help you achieve whatever kind of life goal that you have. For us, we care about that flexibility, but for other people, maybe it's a certain level of security that they want, or maybe they want to be able to, take on a certain kind of career path. So we see that for us, money is a tool to achieve flexibility, but for other families, it may be, or couples, it may be different.
Welcome back, everybody, to another exciting show, the About That Water podcast, where we help the sandwich generation build strong financial habits so that you can spend your money, talk about money, and enjoy your money with confidence. Today, I have somebody who's been doing this for quite some time and has achieved so many different things, but also he has achieved FIRE, which is financial independence and retire early. His name is Dexter Zhuang. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing well. Thanks for welcoming me onto the show, Anthony. Just a quick clarification that you've co-fire.
Oh, close fire.
So
Okay.
definitely. So one milestone on that journey. Not quite at that bigger milestone, but happy to share more.
Awesome. And one of the cool things about we this particular topic is that it's something that everybody wants to achieve. And so my main question to you, has your definition of success has evolved since you've achieved such a great financial milestone?
Great question, Anthony. In the beginning, when I was starting out my career, I was in San Francisco. I was working in tech there. I, didn't have a whole lot of money when I was starting out my professional journey, but I was very motivated. And my main priorities at that point was really to learn the fundamentals of personal finance. So while I was growing my career, then I could reinvest a high percentage of my earnings into investments, and I could also, focus on growing my own skill set and grow my income potential through my career. I think that part was really my main focus throughout my 20s. Now that I'm 33, and a couple years ago across this Coast Fire milestone, and that really helped me just be able to take a little bit of a step back to understand, like, what did I really value in terms of my work and in terms of my lifestyle, and how did I want to spend my time, more importantly. So my journey has evolved a little bit past this milestone because it gave me a bit more space and flexibility to ask those questions for myself and then answer those questions of, like, how do I want to spend my time? So that flexibility is probably the biggest change for me.
Nice. And because, you and your wife have been dealing with this for quite some time, how will those conversations happen? Like when you decided, like, hey, I really want to start dealing and diving into this fire community?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when we first started dating, 6 years ago, I think personal finance came up, but it wasn't until maybe like a few years into the relationship that we started really talking about this more deeply, because we're talking about, okay, should we open up joint bank accounts, shared accounts? I know we started getting deeper into the rabbit hole. For context as well, I'm American. My wife is Australian. We met in Singapore, so our finances were also a little bit more complicated.
Mm,
And when we started talking about it, then uh, we had to go down the rabbit hole of really planning out, like, what we wanted to do in terms of finances, because there were, more variables, right? Like when you're bringing together bank accounts from different countries, like investment accounts from different countries. Um, we started talking about that, and then of course, financial independence kind of came into that conversation because the way we view money is that it's a tool to help you achieve whatever kind of life goal that you have. For us, we care about that flexibility, but for other people, maybe it's a certain level of security that they want, or maybe they want to be able to, take on a certain kind of career path. Uh, so we see that for us, money is a tool to achieve flexibility, but for other families, it may be or couples, it may be different.
That makes sense because you know you had a discussion. You all had a discussion, right, before you guys decided to get married. What would that like? Like, how was that conversation leading up to the big day to say like, hey, um, I would like to be with you, like, and like I want to share my money with you. Do you guys do like separate accounts, or what was those discussions like?
For sure. I think the first step of this was we were in Singapore during COVID, and that's when we started, um, you know, talking about, hey, maybe we should open up like a joint account for our shared expenses, right? Because we would buy groceries together, we would, spend on rent together, right? And these things were all joint. And previous to that, we were using an application called Splitwise. If you're not already familiar with Splitwise, it's like a really simple mobile app for you to like share expenses with your friends or with your loved ones, and it requires you to log every expense, right? So, I think the where push came to shove moment was like we kind of got tired of having to log all the expenses in Splitwise, and uh, I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this, but I'm kind of like like a tracker, right? So I'm like, oh, can we just track everything in Splitwise? And she's like, it was like a $5, thing, or it was like a $2-3 coffee. Like, is that really needed? And then we had to like agree on, okay, maybe like things up below $10, you don't have to track it in Splitwise. But it just kind of became a hassle. Whereas if we could create a joint account, then we could uh, on a monthly basis just transfer in a certain amount, and then um, spend from that joint account and not really think about it too much. So that was, I think, one of the big kind of conversations that we had, and then taking a step forward in terms of sharing our finances. And then I think the next kind of big kind of conversations that we had leading up to that as well was like, okay, how do we decide how much we're contributing, to our joint account? And I'm sure this different for every couple that you've spoken with, but in the beginning we actually started off with splitting it evenly, like half. But this kind of became a issue. Like, this was a mistake more on my part because we were making different levels of income, and at that point in time I was making more than her, and so it felt like it wasn't a kind of like a fair system for how we decided to contribute to this joint account. So there were some discussions there, heated discussions there, and eventually I realized, oh, okay, we can't do this split thing. This isn't working for us. So we divided the like our contributions up based on our income level, right? Like our income divided by like the total household income, that became like our contribution to the joint account, and
I like
that
that.
worked for us. Yeah, of course, every couple decides to do it a little bit differently. For us, that worked out. We were happy with that setup.
Okay, so I take it you lost that argument.
Yeah, yeah. If you want to simplify it to that, that's
Right.
totally cool. Yes.
Like, I'm sorry, babe. Uh,
It's like,
so,
yes. Well, now I think it's a great idea. Now I think it's, yeah, just a smart. It just makes sense.
yeah. And, that's one of the things that we kind of leave out a lot. It's more than the numbers that kind of drive everything. It's also like, how do we actually want to live with each other? And if we want to bring somebody on into that journey. And so obviously she's dealing with her background and you're dealing with your background when it comes to finances. How has your parents impacted your decision making for finances?
Ooh, so I come from I'm a second generation immigrant to the States. My parents are from China originally. My dad initially moved from Shanghai to Canada for graduate school with like $300 in his pocket. So I think they came from a bit more of like the scrappy underdog kind of immigrant, journey. And because of that, growing up, I think, um, for better for worse, they wanted to be frugal and they wanted to be very mindful about the spending and expenses side of things. And that's, kind of continued, I think, in terms of how they perceive money or their relationship with money. Things have changed a little bit over time. Now that they're retired, they're going to resorts in Mexico and spending on travel with friends. So they are definitely spending on what they're enjoying a whole lot more. But I think in terms of how that has evolved their relationship with me is like they obviously want the best for me and they care about how me and my wife, how we're thinking about personal finances and having a plan in place and making sure that you know um, we're going to be taken care of. Well, we're going to be able to take care of ourselves. I think fortunately, when it comes to the relationship with me and my parents, I don't think there's a whole lot of expectation necessarily around you know, got to take care of their retirement or there's not that expectation for sure. Would they appreciate me helping out? Yes, I'm sure they would. But I do feel fortunate in that they have explicitly at least said like, don't worry about us. We got the retirement covered so far. Um, so that's been a conversation at least we've had.
And that's really good that you guys are having that open discussion because when it comes to retirement, a lot of the times the parents are usually hesitant on even opening up about their finances. How did you all got to that so comfortable talking about it? Like what? How did you even start that conversation?
Well, to be candid, we haven't talked about like
Oh,
super detailed. They haven't shared like their financial plan or anything like that, but they did share kind of how they're feeling about their finances, how they're feeling about their plan. Um, where do they feel comfortable, where they don't. So I think it was a evolution. When I first started out working and kind of taking care of my own career growth and finances, my parents started sharing a little bit more about their own journey and their progress in personal finances and how they've thought about it. But it probably wasn't until more recently, now that my wife and I are married, and now that my parents are retired, that we're both kind of like in a stage of life where they're more openly sharing, what they're planning for in the future because they understand like we're trying to make our plans as well, and they don't want to feel like they're in the way of any of those plans.
nice. Okay.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the main trigger. Um, more and more, yeah, they want us to feel like we have our own level of independence and ability to take control of our life decisions.
That makes sense because you're focusing on others, helping them out with their money path. And I'm always curious how it is when it comes to family. And one of those things, family members always look at you like, okay, well, here you go talking about money again. Like, can we talk about something else? Like, so, so what are the biggest misconceptions that people have about aligning their finances with their values?
Ooh, biggest misconceptions for me, I would say that a lot of people that I see when they want to talk about money, it's really a more black and white kind of measure, right? It's like, oh, you have either a lot of money or you don't, and that's kind of the perception of talking about money and personal finances. But I think what's really underrated is the self awareness of what you value,
Mm.
right? And ultimately, whatever you spend on is just a reflection of whatever you value. But reflecting on your values takes a lot of work. It actually takes some time, takes some effort. Maybe that looks like doing some reflection. Maybe that looks like trying out different career paths. It's different for everyone. But I think that exercise of continuing to iterate like your own understanding of your values is kind of like this foundational piece that then you can um, put like whatever kind of personal finance lesson on top of that, kind of like a building block. And money is that lens, right? That your values really looks through.
Nice. Okay, that's a good way of doing it. And I appreciate you sharing that because, some of our money values actually come from when we're children. And I'm glad that you were able to open up about your upbringing during that process. Um, so you ultimately come up with this cool product called like Money Abroad. What is it?
Definitely. Money Abroad started off as a money newsletter for expats or people living abroad. And that was a reflection of my own personal experiences moving from the US to Singapore after, yeah, pretty much like most of my adult life up to that point. I was 20, 28, yeah, 28 or so when I made that move. And what that's really showed me was like, oh, wow, money kind of gets complicated when you're overseas. And that's how I initially started that newsletter. But over time, it has evolved a little bit. It's attracted people who are also non-expats, but they're excited about carving out a way to live on their own terms. Tends to be people who are maybe, 7 to 15 years of experience into their careers, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what next, right? After the point of, maybe you're thinking about starting a family, or maybe you're realizing that you're not interested in walking the same career path for too much longer. Then it's like, okay, what next can you do? And that's why I talk about Coast Fire as one of these topics, and talk about portfolio careers and kind of introduce different alternatives for people in the newsletter.
That makes sense, especially what's going on today. And as a recent events, a lot of people are looking to become expats. What is I guess you could say, what are the main steps that somebody can do right now to kind of prepare themselves if they're thinking about going abroad or living abroad?
Totally. I think the biggest blocker for a lot of people is understanding, if you're just an individual at this point, then you just got to think about your own career path, and then you got to figure out like, okay, how does your career path translate to something overseas, right? And then if you have a partner, then that means also translating like what they're doing career-wise into something overseas, and finding kind of the intersection of that can be a little bit tricky if you have specific kind of career goals. However, if you're more flexible, or if you're fortunate and there's like certain cities that just like really map really well with what you're trying to do, then that can work out. Like that can be feasible. An example of this would be for me, I'm in Mexico City now, but before we were in Singapore, and that was a great intersection of, my wife is Australian. A lot of Australians move to Singapore for career opportunities anyways.
Nice.
So that was a, good next step for her. And then for me, I was interested in living in Southeast Asia, and there were, in terms of my industry, there were a lot of opportunities in terms of the tech industry at the time in Singapore. So there was that kind of happy intersection for us that happened there. For others, it might be different. I think I saw you had Stephanie on your podcast.
Yep.
We met at FinCon as well, and Stephanie's a great example of the Portugal expat community, and lifestyle in Portugal kind of being a match for what her and husband were looking for.
Nice, because we try to figure out like how do we actually make money, when you're abroad.
Exactly.
And it's like, do you teach somebody English, or that's usually the one that everybody go to, and I'm like, okay, do something.
Oh no. Yeah, that tends to be like a recent college grad, maybe 22 or something. Great. Starting point for a lot of people. Definitely not knocking English teachers, in South Korea or something. I think it's really cool. But yeah, probably not like if you have a family, if you're, in your 30s or 40s looking to make a transition. So definitely, figuring out how you're going to make money, like the career path, seeing if your career path can continue to extend overseas, I think is quite important. And if you can take a look at your particular industry and see like, are there any cities where your industry is pretty prominent, then you might find some happy overlaps. So I know, for example, in terms of the tech industry, because I've been in this industry for a decade, is that there's several global cities, right, that now have thriving kind of tech ecosystems, and they want to invest further into it, right? So places like London, right, is one example. That is, I've known several people working in the tech industries, either as professionals or as founders, moving there. In Asia, of course, Singapore is an example of that. So those are some potential examples. Mexico City as well. There are, as a hub for Latin America, it's becoming more attractive for tech companies kind of like base their operations there for the Spanish-speaking part of Latin America. So those are some examples of how, when you take a look at your industry, you might find like a few cities that are quite good for your industry, and then you can maybe visit, talk to some people, get a sense on the ground as well. So, for example, when my wife and I were considering moving to Singapore, I had already visited before, and then I spent some time networking. Like I did a couple of trips in addition, just to network and meet people working in the industry that I want to work in. And I learned a lot, from those conversations, because the reality is like most of the time the information you see on the internet is like totally out of date, or it's just not always like an accurate reflection of what's happening on the ground. So actually going, meeting people, having conversations, or if you can't visit, having at least doing outreach to potential people like kind of in a similar role in your target city, or maybe a super connector, like someone who is really like a community manager or a community leader, right?
Yeah.
In that city. I think it's a great person to connect with, and that can be helpful to get some feedback on how is like the job market doing, what are the opportunities for someone like with a background like me, those kind of questions.
Yeah. And you've been doing, I say, yes, traveling is awesome, but also you got to get a means to why you want to travel. But also in your journey, you've done so much in tech. Where do you see the tech industry when it comes to financial tech that's going to help out the people, the everyday person that's really pinching pennies right now?
Definitely. So I think on one hand, you're seeing obviously like more technologies. Technology is always changing, right? And because of that, the tools that we have are always changing. Personal finance is one kind of area where those tools change really rapidly. They're getting so much easier to use from like a consumer standpoint. Like I think in terms of managing finances, 15 years ago, 10 plus years ago, I think all I can really think of using at that point in time was Mint. But now
Yeah, that
there's
was
like,
about it.
so many different options, right? So it's, I think, a great time for consumers of these tools. So a lot of these tools are pretty low costs as well, like the costs of using these personal finance tools are also getting less and less, and it's not just the tools for managing finances; it's also the investment tools, the funds for investments. So example of this would be like Vanguard is continuing to reduce their fees. I think they just announced they reduced their fees again,
Nice.
right, over time. And I think that's something that anyone can take advantage of, right? Those reduced fee kind of opportunities for investments.
That's good. Because I just want people to know, well, I want the person that's listening right now to know that you do have what it takes. I mean, it's right there at your fingertips. Just gotta press the button.
Exactly. So the tools are there. The investments are there with low fees are there, and yeah, it's really up to you to do some light research on like what it is fits your particular goals, but they're definitely accessible at this point in time.
Yeah. So this is about you though. Like, what areas of focus that you feel needs the most improvement for yourself?
Ooh, good question. So I think um in terms of life stage, my wife and I are kind of at the stage where we don't have kids yet. We haven't really thought of uh plan too far ahead, of course, but we do want to like be financially prepared, right? Like if and when we do have kids, then don't want to be totally like blindsided by all of that.
Yeah,
And
they
then
are
I think the
expensive.
other thing, exactly. And then I think the other thing is just figuring out, like, because she's Australian, I'm American, we're living in Mexico City. The question we always get is like, where are you going to end up? Where are you going to put roots? Like that kind of question. And well, I think it's a very valid question because of our um, background. I think we're a bit more flexible in terms of location and um, in terms of the lifestyle that comes with that. But I think that is something we want to figure out, at least on a year by year, like a shorter time frame kind of horizon. Maybe let's say next 2 to 3 years. Okay, like this kind of chunk of time. Whereas some people want to plan out much longer. It's like, okay, next like 20 years, like we want to be here, right?
Right.
So those areas, the family planning and also planning out, okay, location wise, where do we want to like, uh, let's say, uh, open up accounts or figure out our cost of living? Like those kind of questions are impacted by where we're going to be for the next 2 to 3 years.
That makes sense. So that brings up the question then. How are you feeling about renting versus owning?
Great question. So I'm going to be someone biased because my life has been overseas and definitely been shaped by the desire for flexibility and mobility. So while I think earlier in my career I was interested in potentially buying at that stage, uh, especially I think in the mid 2010s, it seemed to make a lot of sense. Or I had a lot of peers, like friends, colleagues, deciding to buy at that point in time. But for me, I realized, okay, well, if I'm gonna try this moving abroad thing, which first started off as a travel sabbatical and then actually moving overseas after I realized like, oh, this is actually kind of nice. I like this. Then I discovered, well, it might not be totally worth it, right? From um, a financial perspective and from a lifestyle perspective, if I'm not living in that home, so I'm not really using it and I have to rent it out. Um, but then I have to also consider the operational pieces of it, put in the sweat of figuring out what happens when things go wrong, who's going to deal with it, how to get a proper manager in that area, that kind of thing. So, long story short, I prefer renting, and
Right.
the main the main thing for me and my wife is that flexibility. So, candidly, I mean, my wife also has property in Australia, but even still, that was like from before we got married, and I don't think we're totally tied to the idea of like keeping it for forever or anything like that.
Hey, I mean, this is why it's the future. I like having this open discussion because a lot of people are at that point now. It's like, hey, we have our foundation nice and solid. So what now? And you're a perfect example of like, hey, we don't know what's going to happen next, but at least within the next 2 years, there'll be something.
Exactly. We do consider that downside risk, and what we want to avoid is a situation where, let's say, oh, we have to move because our parents are not feeling well. That's a real possibility. Well, they're healthy now, of course, but just in case. And in that scenario, then if we had a property that we had purchased and we had the mortgage and the loan payments, um, that would probably restrict our mobility and restrict our flexibility, unless if we like rent it out, but then we have to then go through the whole process of getting property manager, like figuring out the operational side of it. So that's what we wanted to avoid and give ourselves a bit more breathing room.
Yeah. And considering you're still in your 30s, which is a great way to kind of like you starting to slow down a little bit from when in your 20s you were just all over the place. And it's a good way to do it. I mean, I wouldn't mind if I would say, I'm not sure how this show will evolve, but if the show is still here in 10 years, I would love to actually have you back on and be like, we did wind up doing all the things. Right.
I love that. Yeah, that would be fantastic. And I don't know if you've done this for previous, podcast guests, but I think that's a great idea, just to show like, hey, we talked about these topics. Let's take a look, a few years later, what actually happens in their life.
Well, I can tell you a lot of the people that I interviewed during my first season, they no longer have their business, and I can't even find them on social. So they
Wow.
are dismantled. So it's very few of them has continued on. And my podcast is only coming up on 5 years, so it's
Wow.
cool to see.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, And I try to send them emails, but it's get like, the 404 error. And I'm like, I at least wanted to at least come back on to at least say what happened. But it happens.
That would be a really great episode if you do manage to get them back on. Maybe we'll see them at FinCon and I can help.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So is there anything that you want to leave the audience with before we dive into the final 4 questions?
I think just to summarize what we had talked about a little bit earlier, I want to emphasize that it really helped. Me and my wife did the exercise to figure out, what we viewed as our top values, and fortunately, like a lot of them were aligned, which is great, and that really helped us get clarity on how do we approach like work more intentionally, how do we approach money more intentionally, and prioritize, how we want to save and invest for different things. An example of this is like, so when my wife and I got married, we had a couple smaller banquets in Singapore and Sydney and in Shanghai with our family members and some extended family, and a few friends here and there. But we didn't do like a really, really big wedding because neither of us really prioritized that as like, oh, we really, really want to have like a huge wedding celebration. I mean, in the future, we would like to maybe do like an anniversary party with a group of friends, and that would be really fun. But instead, what we did with, what we would have spent on a wedding, we put away for a honeymoon. So later, we'll take a really nice honeymoon to do like a safari in Tanzania and like go to Hawaii, and like that doesn't really put any pressure on us financially because we already had allocated that. And we're pretty excited for it and looking forward to making that happen. But that required us to make some trade-offs, right? In terms of what it is we wanted. And that started with the values.
That is awesome that you guys were on the same page with that. And hopefully that the person who's listening is really taking note on, hey, it doesn't have to be done all at once. You can have everything, but just not at the same time. You'll get it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well said.
Oh,
yeah, yes. We can do a party, maybe not, for the wedding itself, but maybe in like a few years, do an anniversary party, something like that.
Yeah. Well, you ready for the final 4 questions?
Yeah, let's do it, Anthony. Let it rip.
All right. Dexter, ready. So, number 1, what does wealth mean to you?
Wealth for me, it used to traditionally mean like just having tons of money. But now, the older I get, and maybe, 10 years later when we revisit this, it'll sound different, is that in my 30s, it really is about flexibility. It's about giving me some control over my time and flexibility, and not having to worry too much about how I'm spending money.
Perfect. Number 2, what was your worst money mistake?
For me, I started investing when I think I was 18, and I just got into college, and I opened up a brokerage at E-Trade, and I just picked a couple stocks and started investing that way. And then it wasn't until like maybe a couple years later I learned about index funds, and I was like, oh, this is a much smarter way to do this. And I thought that afterwards I kind of figured it out. I was like, oh, well, I just invest in boring index funds, and that's like pretty simple. But what I didn't expect is how emotional investing is, and inevitably, over the past like 12 years or so since then, I've still like felt the attraction of like, oh, maybe it's like speculating on certain stocks, or maybe it's like, oh, crypto bull run. Why are all my friends talking about it? Maybe I should like, put more than I should into some of that. So I think speculation is still the worst money mistake, but it's also one that I realized like it can it can keep coming up in different forms or shapes.
That is awesome. That you do a lot of reflection on yourself. It seems like you do almost like an annual, or at least a monthly reflection on yourself, just based on your response. Man, wish I had that intuition when I was your age.
Right.
Number 3. Is there a book that inspired your journey or changed your perspective?
All right. So the book that really inspired my expat journey and how I thought about personal finances as an expat is one called Millionaire Expat. It's by Andrew Halen, and he built a $1 million plus investment portfolio even as a school teacher overseas.
Nice.
So I thought that was really cool. And I liked his personal journey of how he learned about investing, by investing on the side, and how he also talks a lot about, like, as an American, when you're overseas, there's like certain tax implications or a lot of questions that come up. It's like, how do I invest while overseas? Should I use my home brokerage? Should I use a brokerage in this new country? And all those nitty gritty questions he dives into. So if you're someone who is looking to move overseas or kind of wants to learn more about what investing is like when that's your life situation, then Millionaire Expat is a potentially good book for you.
Awesome. Number 4. What is your favorite dish to make?
Recently, my wife and I bought a Instant Pot that's like a 9-in-1 Instant Pot, the Ninja. You're nodding your head. Maybe you know it, but it has like the air fryer in it. Okay, air fryer, saute. It's got everything. Anyways, one of our favorite things to make with it is a chili. It's like a 20-minute chili. You just throw in all the minced meat. We use beef here, and then you can saute it in the same pot that you later then use the pressure cooker to make the chili, all in 20 minutes. And I feel like it's just the best because you can do it on Sunday night, and then you get pretty much your meals for the rest of the week.
That's amazing. All right, I'm gonna have to try that out one day. Yeah, thanks for sharing.
Recommend it.
So this is the last question of the show, which is, where could people find out more about you?
Absolutely. You can go to moneyabroad.co, and there you can find all my contact information and more information about what I'm working on.
All right. Thank you so much, Dexter, for all of your information, all of your personal stories. I know we didn't dive into all the businesses and everything like that. Y'all can go to the other platforms that he's been on to talk about that fun stuff. But we are here to learn more about the man behind all of the cool things that you've been doing. And I just want to congratulate you on all of the things that you've been doing, especially when it comes to helping people out with personal finance. And as you heard, everybody, like, you have what it takes. You just got to really take time out to do your research and really understand what it is that you want out of life so that you can align your finances for it. So I wish you all the best. If you didn't get anything out of this one, but you think somebody else would listen to this, definitely slide it on over to them because they could actually help them out as well. So thank you so much. Y'all have a great day. We out.